last thing, and I think that it just kind of popped into my head as you were speaking. Remember what I said, a lot of the people that are listening to this show own an operating business right now. So you might have, a business that's worth $100 million. And if you have a business worth that, the odds are that you have some investments and whatnot that are significant, and you have some complexity in your life that's significant. What would be some of, but they may not have enough assets to open, even to go to a multifamily office. It's very possible. But the complexity of all of that stuff, what advice would you give them to say, where should they be reading? What should they be looking for? How do they take the advice that they're getting to the next level and get ready? If they do sell the business, and even if they don't, if they decide to leave it in there, but there's things that they need. What would you say to them?
Yeah. So a couple of things I would just highlight and just make sure that they have a good awareness of is, one, that the people that work in their operating entity are not necessarily pulled to oversee investments. So it's really, really difficult when you split your people and ask them to have two different allegiances. So it's also a no-no to compensate your operating folks potentially on the growth of your investment portfolio. No, don't do that. Try to really start to carve out and separate those two worlds, because quite honestly, there's a lot of power that you put in the hands of few if you give them that much access, that much knowledge. And which master are they working for? Are they working to maximize, say, the trust assets or multiple investment account assets, or are they really maximizing their efforts towards the operating entities? So a good thought process early on is that if you're building wealth in a retirement account, in separate accounts, try to really separate that from the operating day-to-day entity, and be mindful that you're thinking about what's that pool of capital for. Is it an emergency fund? Is it a rainy day fund? Is it for your heirs for the future? Do you want to give it all away? So whatever you're building that wealth for, be very purposeful and intentional, so you know how it should be managed. That you don't bet the farm and invest as some angel in something when you really needed that as current income to maintain your lifestyle. No. So again, if it's to feed the business and to, come in for capital infusions for growth or whatever, just be very mindful what that pool of capital is supposed to do. I think the other major question I get a lot is like, well, when do I need to start thinking about a family office, or do I need a family office? And I try to remind people that typically the family office becomes appropriate when you have the scale, but you also know that you will be creating to some degree a separate entity. So, again, don't try to have it all operate under operating holdcos. And that at some point you might have a different intention. Some families say, I want to create an investment oriented family office where they really want to make money with their money, versus a lifestyle or services-based family office, which is really to support, right, estate planning, trust, tax, compliance, governance, supporting services to a family with a lot of complicated entities. So I think it's really important to start to map out what you think this wealth is for, what you want it to do. And then lastly, two last things. One, how much do you want to pay? Because nobody takes into account the startup costs of a family office. They think already to the operating expenses of it. So like, oh, it's maybe 50 bips, 100 bips, 1%, 0.5%. But the reality is there's oftentimes a lot more startup costs associated that are sunk. They're fixed costs. You're not going to recoup these. So it's important to be really clear on how much you want to invest in creating this structure. Because if you don't anticipate it lasting for at least a decade plus, don't do it. Don't go down the long, arduous process to get that up and running, because it's a good 1 to 2 year endeavor, and sometimes longer if you're a very complicated family.
And when you put it into framework of it, when you say expensive, we're not talking about 25 grand or 30 grand or 50 grand, correct?
No, I'm talking like, you know, 1 mil, 2 mil, 3 mil, like I'm talking a much bigger expense depending on the complexity. I mean, I know folks who spend, $1 million on estate planning. So that's where I'm like, just be mindful of what you think you need. And again, a lot of attorneys will say, oh, I can I can set up a structure for you. And maybe they can do it for 50 or 100 or $200,000 great. But at the end of the day, it doesn't mean it works. It means
Right.
you've got the legal documents drafted and submitted, but now you got to hire the people. Now you got to create compensation plans. Now you got to create an operating budget. Now you got to create risk controls. So there is a ton of work, just like any other kind of operating company, that's required. And don't underestimate that. Not to scare anyone away from doing it, because there's tremendous obvious reasons to do it. I just always find that many folks imagine what it's like to be having it versus getting it up and running. And there's oftentimes an on-ramp to scaling up a family office.
That is the first time anybody's talked to me on this show about that. So I really want to say thank you for that, because we don't think that there's any right or wrong for any family. I mean, let's say if you get, $10 million, you're not opening up a family office. You're not joining a multifamily office. But there, a virtual family office, you need to have somebody, or an outsourced family office. You need somebody that understands that interconnection of all of those pieces. And a lot of people, I've had the question, when should I start a family office? When should I, move away from just you, Mike, or, you and the team that I have right now? And my answer was always, somewhere around $100 million is probably the right time to be thinking about that. But based on what you just said, in terms of, to have $1 million, $2 million, $3 million just to get startup going, that would, at 100 million, that would scare a few people to say multifamily office might be good.
Yeah, I mean, the people that build a family office control, customization. They're not afraid of costs, because typically they have in their minds how they're making up that money, or they're making so much more money. That cost is not necessarily the driver. But they want the dedicated resources. They want the privacy. They want the customization. Yeah, those are the big drivers for building it out. And then they also have this idea that this is an entity that outlives them, and not in a control, like dead hand way,
Right.
but in a way that's about how do we create a structure that allows for smooth and seamless wealth transfer? How do we think about asset protection and, soft landings for future generations who don't have to come up and figure out how to be successful and, in their career or anything else? I mean, I think there's a lot of reasons why multi-generational family offices exist, but don't kid yourself. There's a lot of planning. There's continual improvement. And, I'm a big believer that they're always learning and evolving.
I have loved this conversation, and you just reminded me, it's seventh generation thinking is kind of why you might be doing this. And that, Jay Hughes could, pounds on that regularly. And then one of my other mentors always said, Michael, when we're talking about transition planning, whether it's a business or an estate, it's think of two things: smooth and orderly, cost and tax efficient. And though the family office may not be cost and tax efficient to begin with, over 7 generations, that makes a lot more smooth and orderly and a lot more cost and tax efficient, probably.
Yeah. And let's give our hats off to all the, family businesses and operating businesses out there, because the shared ownership and the discounting that happens with closely held businesses is another huge tax saver. And I really believe that we need to help fortify the fabric of family firms as much as we can, since we have a lot of pressure, right, from these massive conglomerations that, quite honestly, are sort of consuming and chewing up a lot of these family-run companies that either are first generation, second generation, or beyond. So I do think that the family office can be a complementary structure to operating families who want to figure out how to keep it in the family or keep it going beyond one generation or the next.
Great. All right. You and I could talk for the next 3 hours and probably not get winded, because this is just, we love this stuff and we love serving and helping the families that we do serve on a regular basis. So Kirby Rosplock from Tamarind Partners, Tamarind Learning, thank you for sharing your wealth of knowledge. And I know that, if anybody wants more of what you've heard today, go grab your book. You can go to Tamarind Partners, Tamarind Learnings, and tamarindpartners.com is out there. You can connect with Kirby, I'm sure, on LinkedIn and a number of different ways. But thank you so much for sharing today.
Hey, Michael, it's my pleasure. It's just great to be in your company. And I hope we've left your listeners and viewers with something they didn't know.
100%. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. I'm Michael Columbus with Family Wealth and Legacy in Rochester, New York, and you've been listening to the Family Biz Show. If you've enjoyed this episode and know somebody that might also like it, feel free to share it with them. But more importantly, if you know of a family business that you think would be a great guest and would like to share their story, make sure that you tap them and let them know about us. We'd love to have them on the show. Thank you, everybody, and have a great day.